Welcome to another human read audiobook by the United Marxist Pact Discord server, link below in the description. In this series, we continue our investigation into the initial construction, the organizational structure, and the principles and tactics of the form of worker organization capable of seizing political power and establishing the revolutionary proletarian dictatorship and communality, which can in turn produce the communist mode of production, the shared class interests of the workers of the entire world. Our goal is to compile, analyze, and elaborate on what all these texts have to say about this. In the end, have a strong understanding of the exact scientific process of this, particularly in general terms. At the end of our readings as a whole, we will try to put it all together and present it as a coherent whole in an educational video with associated notations. Today's reading will be Lenin's reply to Rosa Luxemburg in the previous reading, which was the organizational questions of Russian social democracy, Leninism or Marxism. This is one step forward, two steps back, not to be confused with the book One Step Forward, Two Steps Back, I believe. We have a pre-written textual analysis on the terms of the aforementioned topics, which is also posted in the pinned comment if you prefer to read on text, or follow the link in the description to a read-only version of my Google Docs notes. This will summarize the contents of the text, but is no replacement for the actual reading itself, for the sake of understanding the context. Reminder, I'm only reading stuff in terms of the actual questions at hand. In the reading itself, I supply my own commentary, critiques, additions, etc., which may be helpful for understanding some particularities. So, for our analysis of this text, Lenin declares that he is looking for universal organizational structures and principles for the party form, rather than specifics, with these universals including methodologies and organizational structures which allow for proper maintenance, criticism, and rectification of the party. To this end, rejects the idea that local committees should not have autonomy, with decisions in the hands of the Central Committee. Rather, the Central Committee should not have autonomy, instead be subordinate to the editorial board of the Central Organ and Party Council, to stop the minority from interfering with the majority's independence. And because this isn't directly clear, essentially he's saying that a lot of the things that Luxemburg is critiquing aren't his things. Rather, it's the third and rather it is other organizations putting forward their own views on what should be gone through with this, and putting forward motions which he disagrees with, but has his name stamped on because it comes from his phrases. Anyway, continue. In addition, he says that through regular action and structural organization, the party's institutions can be steeled against being supplanted by a private circle. In this case, mind, rules are useful as external aids in particular instances in order to defend against opportunism, but not always. It is a layer of safety. The party can also look at how positions came to be, which should inform future positions better than simply looking at the present and reacting. The party's power lies in its ability to see into the future and orient itself in response to that, rather than any sort of quote-unquote gradualist stance of organizational structure, such as centralization. We can anticipate the need for it and move to structure our organization for such immediately, without having to learn from personal experience. We have developed historical experience already and have learned from it. And with that said, I'll now begin the full audiobook reading. I hope that you enjoyed the session and will attend next time as well. Alright, welcome back to another session of United Marxist Pact readings. Today we are going over V.I. Lenin's reply to Rosa Luxemburg, One Step Forward, Two Steps Back. Last time we read through Luxemburg's Organizational Questions of the Russian Social Democracy, Leninism or Marxism. In that she accuses Lenin of engaging in Blankism, which is in short a secretive plot by people who are outside of the working class to effectively coup the bourgeois state in order to seize control for the sake of the workers. And there's also a bit about the characteristic of opportunism, the need for the how people should organize in organization. So she says that it should absorb other social groups into the will of the proletariat, and this would require a proletarian nucleus that can utilize party bylaws to maintain strong basis in the party. So the proletariat must be a majority, it must be politically educated, it must be class conscious, and able to use strict discipline and strict centralization and severe discipline. Um, there's a bunch of other stuff. She's strongly against what she perceives as the conservative character, and she references, for example, the fact that this would actually happen later in her book, The Russian Revolution, as I recall, wherein she references the fact that, in fact, the Bolsheviks were calling to be careful and not move forward at the time that the Bolshevik Revolution the October Revolution actually happened. In other words, her perspective was that the party was, in fact, tailing the masses rather than leading them or walking alongside them. Now, I don't know how fair of a reading this is of the situation. Um, there's tons of false positives that one gets when organizing, especially in such circumstances. You could look at Bloody Sunday as an example, wherein, okay, you've got thousands of people marching on the Capitol against the Tsar, but it turns out it was a literal trap, right? The priest that was leading the charge was an agent of the Tsar, and he set them up to get massacred because that was the methodology that the Tsar used. Nowadays, with our modern bourgeois governments, they've realized that massacres of political opponents tends to not actually deal with it, so instead they just cast dirt on the leadership and then kill or imprison them, and then they subvert and just break it down, go and tell pro style. And it's a lot more effective that way. She also talks about the character of discipline and centralism and how such develops. It talks about essentially how the proletariat brings other groups, including the petty bourgeois and moral supportive bourgeoisie, as there always are. Consider Engels as an example, uh, within its fold, while not harming the construction, the organization, and the discipline, and the goals of the party, and the aim of opportunism. So now we will be reading Lenin's response to this. This is 1904, same year. One step forward, two steps back. And we're going to read a quick footnote here. This article, written in reply to Rosa Luxemburg's article, quote, Organizational Issues in the Russian Social Democratic Movement, end quote, was sent to Kautsky for publication in the German Social Democratic journal Neue Zeit, but Kautsky would not print it, end quote. Or, not end quote, what am I saying? Comrade Rosa Luxemburg's article in Nos 42 and 43 of the Neue Zeit is a criticism of my Russian book on the crisis in our party. And that footnote goes to one step forward, two steps back. Page 203 to 425 of this volume. I cannot but thank our German comrades for their attention to our party literature and their attempts to acquaint German social democrats with us. But I must point out that Rosa Luxemburg's Neue Zeit article does not acquaint the reader with my book, but with something else. This may be seen from the following instance. Comrade Luxemburg says, for example, that my book is a clear and detailed expression of the point of view of a, quote, intransigent centralism, end quote. Comrade Luxemburg thus supposes I defend one system of organization against another, but actually that is not so. From the first to the last page of my book, I defend the elementary principles of any conceivable system of party organization. My book is not concerned with the difference between one system of organization and another, but with how any system is to be maintained, criticized, and rectified in a manner consistent with the party idea. Okay, this is a good quote. So, looking for universal organizational structure and principles, but not any specifics. Rosa Luxemburg further says that, quote, according to his, Lenin's, conception, the Central Committee has the right to organize all the local party committees. Actually, that is not so. When my views on the subject can be documentarily proved by the draft rules of party organization which I proposed. In that draft, there is nothing about any right to organize the local committees. That right was introduced into the party rules by the commission elected by the party Congress to frame them, and the Congress adopted the commission's text. But besides myself and one other majority adherent, the commission included 3 members of the Congress minority, so that in this commission, which gave the Central Committee the right to organize the local committees, it was my opponents that had the upper hand. Comrade Luxemburg has confused 2 different things. In the first place, she has confused my organizational draft with the modified draft of the commission with the rules of organization as actually adopted by the Congress. Secondly, she has confused the defense of a specific point related to a specific clause of the rules. In that defense, I was by no means intransigent, for I did not object at the plenary session to the amendment made by a commission. With the defense of the thesis, truly, quote, ultra-centralist, is it not? That rules adopted by a party Congress must be adhered to until amended by a subsequent Congress. This thesis, a, quote, purely blankist one, quote, as the reader may readily observe, I did indeed defend in my book quite intransigently. Comrade Luxemburg says that in my view, the, quote, Central Committee is the only active nucleus of the party, end quote. Actually, that is not so. I really wish that he would have some frickin' spacing here. I have never advocated any such view. On the contrary, my opponents, the second party Congress minority, charged in their writings that I did not sufficiently uphold the independence of the Central Committee, that I made too subordinate to the editorial board of the Central Organ and the Party Council, bodies located abroad. To these charges, I replied in my book that when the party majority had the upper hand in the Party Council, the latter never made any attempt to interfere with the Central Committee's independence, but that when the Party Council became a weapon of the minority, this did immediately happen. Comrade Luxemburg said there's no 2 opinions among the Russian Social Democrats as to the need for a united party, that the whole controversy is over the degree of centralization. Actually, that is not so. If Comrade Luxemburg had taken the trouble to acquaint herself with the resolution of the many local party committees that constitute the majority, she would have readily seen, which incidentally is also clear from my book, that our controversy has principally been over whether the Central Committee and Central Organ should represent the trend of the majority of the party Congress, or whether they should not. About this, quote, ultra-centralist and, quote, purely blankist demand that the worthy comrade says not a word. She prefers to claim against mechanical subordination to the part of the whole, against slavish submission, blind obedience, and the other such bogies. I'm very grateful to Comrade Luxemburg for explaining the profound idea that slavish submission is very harmful to the party. But I should like to know, does the comrade consider it normal for supposed party central institutions to be dominated by the minority of the party Congress? Can she imagine such a thing? Has she ever seen it in any party? Comrade Luxemburg farthers me on the idea that all conditions already exist in Russia for forming a large and extremely centralized workers' party. Again, an error of fact. Nowhere in my book do I voice such an idea, let alone advocate it. The thesis I advance expresses something else. I insisted, namely, that all the conditions already existed for expecting party Congress decisions to be observed, and that time was past when a party institution could be supplanted by a private circle. I brought proof that certain academics in our party have shown themselves inconsistent and unstable, and that they had no right to lay the blame for their own lack of discipline upon the Russian proletarians. So I actually want to scroll up a little because there's stuff I should have been pulling over, which I did not. Let's see. Draft. Okay. Okay, and then next up is going to be it's only actually not so. I've never. These charges are play a book. Okay, and then opinion centralization. Our controversy has been principally over. Okay. And I'm not sure what exactly not sure exactly what Lenin had to say in regards to this. I think that he's saying that it should be the minority view rather than, or rather, it should be open. Planned by a private circle. Okay, yes. Okay. All right, sorry, we're caught up. Back to the text. It is nothing short of laughable when Comrade Luxemburg proclaimed such a view, quote, optimistic. Should it not rather be considered pessimistic, without uttering a single word about the factual basis of my thesis? Comrade Luxemburg declares that I glorify the educational influence of the factory. That is not so. It was my opponent, not I, who said that I pictured the party as a factory. I properly ridiculed him and proved with his own words that he confused two different aspects of factory discipline, which unfortunately is the case with Comrade Luxemburg too. Okay. And we've got a footnote here after this gigantic thing where he decided not to do any spacing whatsoever. For his diatribe, pointing out all the errors in Luxemburg's reading of him. Okay, so CF, the Russian pamphlet, Our Misunderstandings, the article, quote, Rosa Luxemburg versus Karl Marx, and this is Lenin's editorial note. Okay. Comrade Luxemburg says I characterized my standpoint more acutely, perhaps, than any of my opponents could have done when I defined a revolutionary social democrat as a Jacobin who has identified himself with the organization of the class-conscious workers. Yet another error fact. It was P. Axelrod, not I, who first started talking about Jacobinism. He was the first to liken our party trends to those of the days of the Great French Revolution. I merely observed that the parallel could only be allowed in the sense that the division of the present social democracy into a revolutionary and opportunist wing corresponded to some extent to the division into Montagnards and Girondists. The old Iskra, which the party Congress endorsed, often drew such a parallel. Just because it recognized this division, the old Iskra fought against the opportunist wing in our party, against the Rabochet Diallo trend. Rosa Luxemburg here confuses comparison of the two revolutionary trends of the 18th and 20th century with identification of those trends. If I say, for example, that the Jungfrau stands in the same relation to the little Scheidegg as a house of 4 stories to one of 2, does not mean I identify a 4-story house with the Jungfrau. Comrade Luxemburg leaves completely outside the factual analysis of the different trends in our party. Yet the greater half of my book is devoted precisely to this analysis, based on the minutes of our party congress and a preface I call special attention to the fact. Rosa Luxemburg sets out to talk about the present position in our party while totally ignoring our Congress, which was what really laid our party's foundation. A rash enterprise, it has to be said, particularly since I point out 100 times in my book that my opponents ignore our party Congress, and by doing so leave all their assertions devoid of all foundation of fact. Comrade, so basically he's saying that, they need to look at how they came to the decisions rather than what the decisions were, which there's some truth to this. Lenin says, rather than looking at the present positions, instead look at how those conditions or positions came to be, which should inform future positions. Again, like I said, this should inform future positions, so I'm not sure whether or not you can just say you can't draw conclusions about my organization from the way it currently is. That was decided from other things. I had something else in mind. And it's like, well, if your organizational structure led to these things that we both consider to be bad, then that would indicate that there's something faulty about the organizational structure. So I don't think that this is a strong defense. Okay, continuing. Comrade Luxemburg commits exactly the same basic error. She repeats naked words without troubling to grasp their concrete meanings. She raises bogeys without informing herself of the actual issue of the controversy. She puts in my mouth commonplaces, general principles and conceptions, absolute truths, and tries to pass over the relative truths pertaining to perfectly definite facts, with which I alone operate. And then she rails against set formulas and invokes the dialectics of Marx. It is the worthy comrade's own article that consists of nothing but manufactured formulas and runs counters to the ABC of dialectics. Okay. This ABC tells us that there's no such thing as an abstract truth. Truth is always concrete. Comrade Rosa Luxemburg loftily ignores the concrete facts of our party's struggles and engages in grandiloquent declamations about matters which it is impossible to discuss seriously. Let me cite one last example from Comrade Rosa Luxemburg's second article. She quotes my remark that the way the rules of organization are formulated can make them more or less a trenchant weapon against opportunism. And we got a footnote here. See page 273 of this volume. Editor's note. Very, very helpful. Just what formulations I talked about in my book. And all of us talked about the congresses of that she does not say a word. What the controversy at the party congress was, and against whom I advanced my theses, she does not touch on in the slightest. Instead, she favors me with a whole lecture on opportunism in the parliamentary countries. But about the peculiars, so basically, right, remember that Russia was not a parliamentary country at the time. This was in 1904. I don't think that the provisional government was in place yet. So it was a complete tsardom. So the character of the party had to be, in its own way, quite significantly distinct, because they had to organize on strictly illegal grounds. There was no legal basis for their organization to exist at any turn. Okay. But about the peculiar specific varieties of opportunism in Russia, the shades which it has taken on there and which my book is concerned, we find not a word in her article. The upshot of all these very brilliant arguments is, quote, party rules are not meant in themselves. understand this who can. To be a weapon of resistance to opportunism, but only an outward instrument for exerting the dominant influence of the actual existing revolutionary proletarian majority of the party. End quote. Quite so. But how this actually existing majority of our party was formed, Rosa Luxemburg does not say. Yet this is exactly what I talk about in my book. Nor does she say what influence it was that Plekhanov and I defended with the help of this outward instrument. I can only add that never and nowhere have I talked about such nonsense as that of the party rules are a weapon in of themselves. So basically, let's see. So basically, she accused Lenin of utilizing rules as a replacement for principles, right? Um, I think that's what is being said here. I'm not absolutely certain. Um, but they're presented as external, which is fair to a good degree, right? Rules emerge out of principles. But let's see. Nor does she say what influence it was that Plekhanov and I defended with the help of this outward instrument. So Lenin is basically saying, hey, listen, the rules can be useful as weapons under particular circumstances. They're not weapons in of themselves, but they can be useful. Rules are useful as external aids in particular instances in order to defend against opportunism, but not always. Okay, back to the text. The best way to answer this kind of presentation, in my views, will be to set forth the concrete facts of our party struggle. Anyone will then be able to see how ill Comrade Luxemburg's abstract commonplaces and formulas sort with the concrete facts. Our party was founded in Russia in the spring of 1898 at a Congress of Representatives of several Russian organizations. It was named the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, Rabushaya Gazeta. Footnote. Rabushaya Gazeta, the Workers' Gazette, was an illegal paper published in 1897 by the Kiev group of Social Democrats. Two issues appeared, number 1 in August and number 2 in December, dated November. The first Congress of the RSDLP adopted Rabushaya Gazeta as the official organ of the party, but the paper had to cease publication as a result of a police raid on the printing press, the arrest of the Central Committee. Concerning attempts to resume publication in 1899, see present edition, volume 4, pages 207 to 9. Back to the text. Rabushaya Gazeta was made the central organ, and the Union of Russian Social Democrats abroad became the party's foreign representatives. Very soon after the Congress, the Central Committee of the party was arrested. Rabushaya Gazeta had to cease publication after its second issue. The whole party became a shapeless conglomeration of local party organizations known as committees. The only bond between these local committees was an ideological, purely spiritual one. A period of disunity, vacillation, and splits was bound to set in again. The intellectuals who in our party made up a much larger percentage than in the West European parties. Yes, Rosa Luxemburg in her text critiqued Lenin's stance on intellectuals as well. Sorry, back to the text. The intellectuals who in our party made up a much larger percentage in the West European parties had taken up Marxism as a new vogue. This vogue very soon gave place to a slavish acceptance of the bourgeois criticism of Marx, on the one hand, and infatuation for a purely trade unionist labor movement. strikeism, form of economism, on the other. The divergence between the intellectual opportunists and the proletarian revolutionary trends led to a split in the Union abroad. The newspaper Rabosha Maisel and the Rabosha Dielo magazine published abroad expressed, the latter in somewhat lesser degree, the standpoint of economism. They belittled the importance of political struggle and denied the existence of a bourgeois democratic element in Russia. So, in other words, they said that, hey, look, we're a fully feudal state. When in reality, uh, capitalist development had been occurring underneath the feudal imperial state for quite some time at that point, and it was essentially emerging out of its shell. The quote legal critics of Marx, Messrs. Struve, Tugendbanskaya, Baranovsky, Bogokov, Berydiev, and the rest swung all the way to the right. Nowhere in Europe do we find Bernsteinism arriving so speedily at its logical consummation, the formation of a liberal group, as was the case in Russia. There, Mr. Struve began with, quote, criticism in the name of Bernsteinism and ended up setting up a liberal magazine, Osvobozinia, liberal in the European sense of the term. Plekhanov and his friends, who broke away from the Union abroad, met with support from the founders of Iskra and Zarya. These two publications waged, even Comrade Luxemburg has heard something about that, a, quote, brilliant 3-year campaign against the opportunists of the party, a campaign of the Social Democratic, quote, mountain against the Social Democratic, quote, Gironde, end quote. The expression belongs to the old Iskra. A campaign against Raboshea Dielo, comrades Krishevsky, Akimov, Martinov, and others, against the Jewish Bund, against the organizations in Russia that eagerly espouse this trend, notably the St. Petersburg so-called Workers' Organization and the Vorozhnev Committee. It became more and more obvious that the purely ideological bond between the committees was not enough. They need to create a really united party, that is, to effect what was only foreshadowed in 1898, asserted itself more and more insistently. Finally, at the end of 1902, an organizing committee was formed to convene the Second Party Congress. This organizing committee, which was largely set up by the Iskra organization in Russia, also included a representative of the Jewish Bund. In autumn of 1903, the Second Congress was held at last. It ended, on the one hand, in the party's formal unification, on the other, in a split into majority and minority. That division did not exist before the Congress. Only a detailed analysis of the struggle at the Congress can explain this division. Unfortunately, the supporters of the minority, including Rosa Luxemburg, shy away fearfully from any such analysis. In my book, present to the German reader by Comrade Luxemburg in such a singular matter, I devote over 100 pages to the close study of the Congress minutes, which make up a volume of some 400 pages. This analysis caused me to divide the delegates, rather votes, we had delegates with 1 vote and with 2, into 4 main groups. 1. Majority Iskraists, adherents of the trend of the old Iskra, 24 votes. 2. Minority Iskraists, 9 votes. 3. Quote, center, also referred to ironically as the marsh, 10 votes. And lastly, 4. Anti-Iskraists, 8 votes, making 51 votes in all. I analyze the part played by these groups in all the voting of the Congress and prove on all issues of program, of tactics, and of organization. The Congress was an arena of struggle between the Iskraists and the anti-Iskraists, with the march making various zigzags. Anyone even slightly familiar with our party's history is bound to see that it could not have been otherwise. But all supporters of the minority, including Rosa Luxemburg, modestly close their eyes to this struggle. Why? Because this struggle makes manifest the utter falsity of the minority's present political position. Throughout the struggle at the Party Congress, on dozens of questions, in dozens of votes, the Iskarists fought the anti-Iskarists and the Marsh, which sided the more definitely with the anti-Iskarists, the more concrete the matter of issue. the more positively affected the fundamentals of social democratic activity, the more tangibly involved putting into practice the old Iskrist long-standing plans. The anti-Iskrists, particularly Comrade Akimov and St. Petersburg Workers' Organization delegate, Comrade Brokry, who always agreed with him, and nearly always Comrade Martinov and the 5 delegates of the Jewish Bund, were against recognizing the trend of the old Iskra. They defended the old separate organizations and voted against their subordination to the party, their fusion into the party. The organizing committee incident, the dissolution of the Yuzhny Raboshi group, the leading group of the Marsh, and so on. They fought against the centralized rules of organization, 14th sitting on the Congress, and accused all the Iskarists at that time of wanting to introduce, quote, organized distrust, emergency laws, and all other such horrors. All the Iskarists, without exceptions, laughed at then. It is remarkable that Comrade Rosa Luxemburg should take these bogies seriously. On the great majority of the questions the Iskarists carried that day, they predominated at the Congress, as is clear from the figures given above. But during the second half of the Congress, when less fundamental issues were being decided, the anti-Iskarists had the better of it. Some of the Iskarists voted with them. That was the case, for example, with regard to proclaiming equality to all languages in our program. On this point, the anti-Iskarists nearly succeeded in defeating the program committee and getting their formulation carried. It was also the case over paragraph 1 of the rules, that when the anti-Iskarists and the Marsh put through Martov's formulation. According to this formulation, party members are not only those who belong to party organizations, the formulation defended by Plekhanov and myself, but also to all persons working under the control of party organizations. Okay, and there's a footnote here. Comrade Kalti had sided with Martov's formulation. The argument he pleads is expediency. In the first place, at our party congress, this point was not discussed from the standpoint of expediency, but of principle. That was the way the question was put by Axelrod. Secondly, Comrade Kautsky is mistaken if he thinks that under the Russian police regime, there is such a big difference between belonging to a party organization and simply working under its control. Thirdly, it is particularly misleading to compare the position in Russia today to that in Germany under the anti-socialist law. That was a footnote by Lenin, and there is a footnote to that footnote. The anti-socialist law in Germany was promulgated in 1878. It suppressed all organizations of the Social Democratic Party, mass working class organizations, and the labor press. Socialist literature was confiscated, and many social democrats were deported. The law was annulled in 1890 under pressure of the mass working class movement. Okay. So what's been said here? Lenin is basically saying that essentially, because Rosa Luxemburg is only looking at the result, she's not seeing the process behind getting those results. And in that, he's essentially saying, hey, look, there's actual democracy going on here. The majority party happens to have been Iskra, who had the correct line, and the moderates and the anti-Iskarists continually voted against them on matters that were not central to the actual internal line, but had things off to the side, like, for example, the characteristics of language. Many members of the Iskra group, in fact, voted alongside the anti-Iskarists in terms of rectifying the official position. Now, apparently that didn't go through. In addition, this conception of organized distrust and emergency laws, the emergency laws never went through, and organized distrust would essentially be a conception of, I assume, democratic centralism, by essentially saying we don't trust you to go in and actually make the decisions that you say that you will, or follow through with what you've said you follow through with. you know, with over and over again in American politics, right? Uh, Apparently, we're supposed to trust these guys who say that we will go ahead and do such and such, but then one guy decides, you know what? No, I'm going to go against my party in order to support the ruling class. And then I'm going to be what everybody gets angry at today. And anyway, I'm not making myself perfectly clear, but I hope it's understandable. The same thing happened in the elections to the Central Committee and the editorial board of the Central Organ. The compact majority consisted of 24 Iskarists, and they put through the long since planned reconstitution of the editorial board. Of the 6 former editors, 3 were elected. The minority consisted of 9 Iskarists, 10 members of the quote center, and 1 anti-Iskarist. The other 7 anti-Iskarists, representing the Jewish Bund and the Rabbi Diello, had withdrawn from the Congress by then. This minority was so displeased with the elections that it had decided to take no part in the rest of the elections. Comrade Kautsky was quite right when he said that the reconstitution of the editorial board was the main cause of the struggle that followed. But his view that I expelled 3 comrades from the editorial board can only be attributed to his being totally uninformed about our Congress. In the first place, non-election is far from the same thing as expulsion, and I certainly had no power at the Congress to expel anyone. And secondly, Comrade Kautsky seems to have no inkling about the fact that of a coalition between the anti-Iskarists, the center, and a small section of the Iskra adherents had political implications too, and could not fail to influence the outcome of the elections. Anyone who does not willfully close his eyes to what happened at our Congress is bound to see that our new division into minority and majority is only a variant of the old division into a proletarian revolutionary and an intellectual opportunist wing of our party. That is a fact, and there's no explaining or laughing it away. Unfortunately, after the Congress, the principles involved in this division were obscured by squabbling over co-optation. Actually, I want to take this bit here, because that is potentially important. Okay, sorry. Unfortunately, after the Congress, the principles involved in this division were obscured by squabbling over co-optation. The minority would not work under the control of the central institutions unless the 3 ex-editors were again co-opted. This fight went on for 2 months. The weapons used were boycott and disruption of the party. 12 committees, out of the 14 that spoke out on this subject, severely condemned these methods of struggle. The minority would not even accept the proposal, made by Plekhanov and myself, that they should set forth their point of view in Iskra. At the Congress of the League abroad, the thing was carried to the length of showering the members of the central bodies with personal insults and abuse. Autocrats, bureaucrats, gendarmes, liars, etc., etc. They were accused of suppressing individual initiative and wanting to introduce slavish submission, blind obedience, and so on. Plekhanov's attempts to characterize these minority methods of struggle as anarchistic did not avail. After this Congress, Plekhanov came out with his epoch-making article against me, quote, "What should not have been done," number 52 of Iskra. In this article, he said that fighting revisionism did not necessarily fight the revisionists. It was clear to all that he was referring to our minority. He further said that one should not always fight against the anarchistic individualism so deeply ingrained in the Russian revolutionary, that at some time concessions were a better way to subdue it and avoid a split. I resigned from the editorial board as I could not share his view. The minority editors were co-opted. Then following a fight for co-optation to the Central Committee. My offer to conclude peace on the basis of the minority keeping the central organ and the majority's Central Committee was rejected. The fight went on. They were fighting, quote, on principle, against bureaucracy, ultra-centralism, formalism, Jacobinism, Schweitzerism, I was the Russian Schweitzer, and other such bogies. I ridiculed all these accusations in my book and pointed out that they were either just a matter of squabbling about co-optation co-optation, or if they were to be recognized conditionally as involving principles, nothing but opportunist Girondist phrases. The present minority are only repeating what Comrade Akimov and other acknowledged opportunists said our Congress against the centralization of the adherents of the old Iskra. The committees in Russia were outraged at the conversion of the central organ into the organ of a private circle, an organ of co-optation, squabbling, and party scandal. A number of resolutions expressed a severe censure were passed. Only the so-called St. Petersburg Workers' Organization, already mentioned, and the Voronezh Committee, both of them supporters of Comrade Akimov's trend, pronounced their satisfaction in principle at the trend of the new Iskra. Demands to have the Third Party Congress summoned became even more numerous. The reader who takes the trouble to make a first-hand study of the struggle in our party will readily see that, concretely and practically, Comrade Rosa Luxemburg talked about, quote, ultra-centralism, about the need for centralization to be gradual and the like, is a mockery of our Congress, while abstractly and theoretically, if one can speak here, or of theory at all, it's nothing but a vulgarization of Marxism, a perversion of true Marxian dialectics, etc. I would love it if you would explain how, but okay. Simply because I'm allergic to people just saying dialectics as to support their point and then not actually elaborating. Anyway, the latest phase in our party struggle is marked by the fact that the majority members have in part been ousted from the Central Committee, in part rendered useless, reduced to non-entities. This happened owing to changes in the Central Committee's composition, etc. Footnote, the members elected to the Central Committee at the Second Congress were Lynx Krasnikov and I'm not even going to try, and Noskov. In October, New Style, in 1903, 4 names were co-opted. In November, Lenin and Galperin were co-opted. In July to September 1904, further changes took place in the Central Government Committee's composition. Links and Essen supporters of Lenin were arrested. The consolators and Name and Gusarov resigned over Lenin's protests. The consolators Kraskin, Noskon, and Galperin unlawfully ousted the majority adherents Zimle Name and co-opted 3 consolators. Name, Karpov, and Name. As a result of these changes, the majority of the Central Committee now consisted in conciliators. I would like to know what is meant in this case by conciliator. But, okay. Continuing. The Party Council, which after the co-optation of the old editors likewise fell into the minority's hands, and the present Central Committee have condemned all agitation for summoning, I think, the Third Congress, are taking the path of personal deals and negotiations with some members of the minority. Organizations which dare to commit such a crime as to agitate for Congress, as for instance a certain agent body of the Central Committee, have been dissolved. And we got a footnote here. Lynn is referring to the Central Committee's decision to dissolve its Southern Bureau, which had been agitating for the convening of the Third Party Congress. So to do a quick aside to make sure everybody's following, Lenin is essentially saying, hey, my gripe with the intellectuals isn't just a belief that they're aligned with the bourgeois influences. It's that they have wrecked the party. They went in and co-opted all these positions. They are the ones that are presiding over this bureaucratic centralism and stuff like that, as Rosa Luxemburg is seeing. And in fact, what Rosa Luxemburg is critiquing is not Lenin's doing. It's these other people who have gone in and taken what he said and fucked it all up on purpose. Okay, continuing. A campaign against the summoning of the Third Congress had been proclaimed by the party council, and this is 1904, of course. Summoning of the Third Congress has been proclaimed by the party council and the new central committee all along the line. The majority have replied with the slogan, "Down with Bonapartism." That is the title of a pamphlet by Comrade Galiorka. Footnote. Pseudonym of the Bolshevik M.S. Olmensky Alexandrov. Continuing. Who speaks for the majority. More and more resolutions are being passed declaring the party institutions which fight against the Congress are anti-party and Bonapartist. How hypocritical was all the minorities' talk against ultra-centralism in favor of autonomy. It's obvious from the fact that a new majority publishing house started by myself and another comrade, which issued the above-named pamphlet by Comrade Galiorka and some others, has been declared outside the party. And footnote, this refers to the Bonk Buryevich and Lenin Publishing House of the Social Democratic Party literature, started by the Bolsheviks after the Menshevik editors of Iskra closed the columns of the papers to them and refused to print statements by the party organizations and members upholding the Second Party Congress decisions and demanding the convening of the Third Congress. It issued a number of pamphlets directed against the Mensheviks and the conciliators. Okay, conciliators in this case would be, economists and people who are pushing for conciliation with the bourgeois government, with the Mensheviks, etc. Lenin, the Zemstvo campaign, and, quote, Iskra's plan, Galiorka, down with Bonapartism, Orlovsky's The Council Against the Party, and others. Back to text. This new publishing house affords a majority their only opportunity of propagating their views, for the columns of Iskra are as good as closed to them. Yet, or rather just because of it, the party council has made the above ruling on purely formal grounds. Our publishing house has not been authorized by any party organization. It need hardly be said how greatly positive work has been neglected, how greatly the prestige of social democracy has suffered, how greatly the whole party is demoralized by this nullification of all the decisions, all the elections made by a second Congress. In this fight, which the party institutions accountable to the party are waging against the convening of the Third Congress. Actually, no, this is obvious, purely formal grounds. I won't take that, even though it is important to note that, of course, if one is utilizing formal grounds to disrupt the ability for organization, then you're doing it wrong. And you're, in fact, an internal enemy. That's part of the reason why we've got Rule 1984. To recite, to make it clear the rules are not hard-coded, nor are they equally applied, nor do we want or expect staff to be neutral arbiters to the letter of the law. The spirit, the purpose of the rules is what we're interested in, which include 1, forming the basis for maintaining our server's existence, which is Discord's terms of service. These are the only hard-coded ones, and we don't really have a choice about them. 2, maintaining a high-quality membership of good faith people who engage in proper discussion ethics. And 3, allow for a comfortable place to discuss highly stressful topics and protect our membership. And we reserve the right to arbitrarily punish any and all offenses not covered in the rules, right? So long as it maintains the spirit, right? The actual fundamental intent of the organization is what needs to be maintained, not some slavish adherence to the rules or the organization and stuff like that. In reality, your organization should be made highly dynamic and capable of adapting internally and externally and so on and so forth. Right? In a proper organization, those sorts of rules and stuff, they're tools, but only when they are in service of the larger principles. The structure should only be there insofar as it serves a purpose. Now, again, your structure should be highly dynamic. So, in other words, your structure should be in support of, moving outside of your structure, right? You're trying to retain systemic viability. And that involves maintaining your identity, your principles. Even in the face of upsets, shall we say, like this, right? Lenin has described many forms of upsets, which his organization failed to actually adequately deal with. And later there was a significant shift back in order to deal with that, as the various members and the workers recognized the shit that was going on and tried to deal with it. And then they adapted and so on and so forth. Question is, how can we avoid having those bad things in the first place? And it's not simply making declarations of principles. The principles are very freaking important. It's also having a structure in order to maintain those principles. It's about having a dynamic one that can respond to external and internal conditions in order to allow for those things to not actually harm your principles, but rather to reinforce them, to bring your organization to homeostasis, to regenerate and heal back better at that. And that's where we're going to end this little bit. We didn't really hear a lot about organization besides Lenin defending his, but there's lots of interesting stuff to learn about the organization through his defenses, where the failures were, and really what could come after this, if I can figure out where, is the success. If Lenin explained somewhere how it is that he came to defeat the economists and stuff. I know he wrote tons of different things, like, for example, his criticism and empiricism. I've only read excerpts out of it. It's been a while. But he responded to the economists in those terms and in other places as well. But of course, that would not necessarily win him the party. Clearly, at some point here, the a third Congress was forced, and these people were ousted, and Lenin gained control of the party. Lenin and the other Iskrists gained control of the party, and so on and so forth. And it would probably be interesting to read about that. With that said, that's the end of this reading.